This story is titled, "At My Golden Brother's Engagement Party, Mom and Dad Made Me Look Like a Loser by Seating Me Near the Toilet, saying I don't deserve their attention and they don't want the elite to see me, so I exposed everything about his successful deal and the bride, leaving all guests faceless. Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be posting family drama here. But after what happened at my brother's wedding last month, I need to get this off my chest and honestly want some outside perspective on whether I went too far. They literally seated me and my family near the restrooms because they were worried we'd embarrass them in front of the important guests. What they didn't know was that I was actually the one managing the multi-million-dollar contract my brother wouldn't shut up about. When I decided I'd had enough and canceled that contract, it exposed decades of lies, theft, and manipulation that went far deeper than I ever imagined. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Blake, I'm 38 years old, and I work as a supply chain operations manager at a logistics company here in Cleveland. Basically, I make sure trucks go where they need to go when they need to go there. Sounds simple, but there's a lot more strategy and coordination involved than most people realize. I started at the absolute bottom of this industry and worked my way up through pure determination and long hours. Now I manage about 45 people and make enough to keep a decent roof over our heads in a nice neighborhood. My career path wasn't exactly what my parents had in mind for their firstborn son. They expected me to follow the family tradition of soul-crushing office jobs that would eventually lead to a midlife crisis and decades of quiet desperation. My father worked in banking for 42 years, wearing the same tie every Tuesday and complaining about the same coworker for 4 decades straight. When I announced that I was going into logistics instead of pursuing some traditional white-collar career, you'd have thought I told them I was joining a cult that worships potatoes. I started as a loader when I was 20 years old, throwing boxes into trucks during the midnight shift while taking community college classes during the day. I was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night for 2 years straight, running on coffee and sheer stubbornness. My first promotion was to dispatcher, which meant I finally got to sit down during my 12-hour shifts, though I was still earning barely above minimum wage. But I stuck with it because I could see the bigger picture. I learned every route in our system, memorized every driver's quirks and preferences, and figured out which clients needed special handling and why. By the time I was 27, I'd been promoted to shift supervisor. By 30, I was operations manager for the entire Cleveland hub. Now, at 38, I oversee the entire regional distribution network for our company. Not bad for a guy whose high school guidance counselor suggested that maybe I should look into trade school as his most optimistic career advice. My job isn't glamorous by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm damn good at what I do. I can look at a map of shipping routes and spot inefficiencies that save companies serious money, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. My boss calls me the shipping whisperer, which is cheesy as hell, but whatever. At our company Christmas party 3 years ago, they gave me an award for saving our biggest client over $600,000 in a single year. The trophy still sits on my desk next to pictures of my family, and I'm proud of what it represents. My wife Megan is 31 and teaches 2nd grade at the local elementary school. We met 11 years ago when she spilled coffee on my jacket outside a bookstore and made a terrible joke about it. Somehow that disaster of a first meeting led to marriage and the best relationship of my life. She's incredibly patient, which she has to be considering she spends all day with 7-year-olds and then comes home to me and our son Lucas, who's basically a tiny tornado of energy and space facts. Megan is the kind of teacher who remembers every single kid's birthday, has a different voice for each character when she reads stories aloud, and somehow maintains her sanity despite spending her days with tiny humans who think glue sticks are legitimate snacks. She keeps our household running with military precision, but makes it look completely effortless. Our son Lucas is 8 years old and honestly just a really good kid. He's smart as a whip and curious about absolutely everything in the universe. Last month, he actually corrected his science teacher about whether Mars has 2 moons. The kid's got a memory, like a steel trap for anything involving planets, rockets, or space exploration. Of course, this same incredible memory is completely useless when it comes to remembering to put his dirty clothes in the hamper. But that's 8-year-old logic for you. Then there's my younger brother Tyler, who's 32 years old and has always been the golden child of our family. He's a Georgetown graduate with an MBA who works at some fancy investment firm downtown, making what he claims is serious bank. Tyler drives a BMW X5 and lives in one of those ultra-modern condos with concrete floors and exposed ductwork that supposedly costs a fortune. It's the kind of place that looks incredibly uncomfortable, but impresses people who care about that sort of thing. Basically, his apartment looks like what would happen if an Apple store had intimate relations with an IKEA showroom. Tyler is the kind of guy who orders $20 cocktails made with ingredients you've never heard of, then spends 10 minutes explaining why they're superior to your simple beer choice. He wears watches that cost more than my first car did, and has strong opinions about everything from wine pairings to window treatments. His Instagram account reads like a showcase of luxury vacations, exclusive restaurants, and carefully staged selfies with minor celebrities at charity events. What most people don't know, but what I figured out about 3 years ago, is that Tyler's entire lifestyle is built on a foundation of lies and crushing debt. He's always been incredibly good at creating the illusion of success without having the actual substance to back it up. That BMW is leased way beyond what he can realistically afford. The fancy condo is mortgaged to the absolute hilt, with monthly payments he can barely make even with his decent salary. Those designer suits represent credit card debt that would make Dave Ramsey spontaneously combust with rage. I figured out Tyler's financial smoke and mirrors act about 3 years ago when he asked to crash at our place for what he claimed would be just a week, while his condo was supposedly being renovated. It turned out that his electricity had been shut off for non-payment, and I discovered a stack of past due notices in his gym bag when I was looking for a phone charger he'd borrowed. The magical renovation was mysteriously completed exactly when his next paycheck cleared and he could pay his electric bill. But hey, at least his Instagram followers got to see those artistically filtered photos of his summer detox cleanse that conveniently explained why he wasn't posting any pictures of himself using his supposedly fancy kitchen during that time. Growing up, Tyler could literally do no wrong in our parents' eyes. The favoritism wasn't subtle or hidden. It was blatant and constant. During my senior year of high school, I worked my ass off to save money for a car, taking on extra shifts at my part-time job and carefully budgeting every dollar. I finally found this decent Honda Civic for $3,200 that needed some work but was reliable transportation. The very day after I bought that car with my own hard-earned money. My parents surprised Tyler, who was just a sophomore at the time, with a brand new Cherokee for getting a B+ on a single history project. A brand new Cherokee for 1 B+ grade, while I had maintained a 3.8 GPA while working 27 hours a week and got absolutely nothing. I still remember my high school graduation ceremony vividly. I was in the top 18% of my class, which wasn't valedictorian material, but was pretty solid for a kid who was working 27 hours a week while maintaining his grades. After the ceremony, while other parents were taking pictures and celebrating with their kids, my dad Robert's only comment to me was, "Try not to screw up community college." 2 years later, when I told them I was skipping the last 2 years of traditional college to take a full-time position at the shipping company where I'd been working part-time, my father didn't speak to me for 3 weeks straight. My mother, Patricia, kept sending me college brochures in the mail for months afterward, as if I might suddenly change my mind about my career path. Meanwhile, they paid for Tyler's entire education without him contributing a single dollar. They covered his tuition, his apartment rent, and even gave him spending money for what they called networking events, which, as far as I could tell, was just drinking expensive alcohol with future investment bros. The double standard was so obvious it was almost comical, except that I was living through it. The pattern of blatant favoritism continued well into our adulthood, becoming even more pronounced as the years went by. When Megan announced her first pregnancy, my mother's immediate response was to ask if we were really ready for this responsibility, as if having a planned child in a stable marriage was some kind of reckless decision. Yet when Tyler got promoted to junior analyst, which is basically an entry-level title with a fancy name, my parents took out an actual paid newspaper announcement in the local paper. An honest-to-God newspaper announcement like it was 1954, with a headline that read, "Local son achieves greatness in financial sector." I was genuinely surprised they didn't hire a skywriter to circle the neighborhood. The most painful part of this ongoing favoritism is how it's affected my son's relationship with his grandparents. They've missed Lucas's last 4 birthdays, and each time there's been some Tyler-related excuse. The first time, they were helping Tyler move into his new place, which turned out to be a lateral move to avoid eviction. The second time, they were on a cruise that Tyler had supposedly gotten them tickets for, though I later learned they'd paid for it themselves after Tyler promised to reimburse them. The third time, Tyler had some work event, and they went as his guests to show him off to their friends. The fourth time was just last month. Tyler had a golf tournament that was apparently more important than their grandson's birthday party. My kid barely knows his grandparents at this point. Sometimes he refers to them as the old people in the pictures, which would be hilarious if it wasn't so heartbreaking. Lucas has stopped asking when Grandma and Grandpa are coming to visit because he's learned not to expect them to show up. An 8-year-old shouldn't have to learn that kind of disappointment from his own family. The fancy wedding invitation arrived in our mailbox in February, complete with gold embossing and more layers than a wedding cake. Tyler was marrying Victoria, some pharmaceutical sales rep he'd met at a charity golf tournament. According to my mother, Victoria's family knows people, whatever the hell that means. Probably that they're wealthy, or maybe they're in witness protection. Either way, Mom was thoroughly impressed by the connection. I'd met Victoria exactly twice at painfully awkward family dinners where Tyler spent the entire time dropping names of executives and exotic vacation destinations while Victoria nodded enthusiastically at everything he said. She actually seemed nice enough beneath the carefully maintained exterior. I could see laugh lines around her eyes under her perfectly applied makeup. And she had a quick wit when Tyler wasn't monopolizing the conversation with his endless monologues about business deals and networking opportunities. She also asked thoughtful questions about Lucas and seemed genuinely interested in his space obsession. I remember thinking at the time that she deserved better than my brother. But then again, so did most people who had the misfortune of getting involved with Tyler's web of deception. The wedding was set for June at this ridiculously fancy hotel in downtown Cleveland. I checked their website out of curiosity, and rooms started at $500 a night. The invitation mentioned that they had reserved a block of rooms for guests at the special rate of $400 per night. Megan and I decided immediately that we'd drive home after the reception because for $400, I expect the room to come with a personal butler and someone to chew my food for me. I tossed the invitation onto our kitchen counter with the rest of the bills and junk mail, where it sat for a few days. Megan found it later that night while she was sorting through the stack of mail and asked if we were actually going to attend. I shrugged and said, "Do we really have a choice?" The truth was that I hadn't spoken more than a dozen words to Tyler in over 9 months, and most of those had been forced pleasantries at family gatherings. But Megan convinced me that we should go to the wedding, partly because she'd already bought a new dress that she was excited to wear, and partly because my mother would harass her relentlessly for an entire year if we skipped Tyler's big day. So I dropped the RSVP card in the mail the next day, but the whole situation left a distinctly bad taste in my mouth. Fast forward to June, and the wedding day arrived with all the pomp and circumstance you'd expect from Tyler's over-the-top lifestyle. The hotel was exactly what you'd predict. Marble floors that probably cost more than most people's cars, giant crystal chandeliers hanging from vaulted ceilings, and valets wearing white gloves who looked like they'd stepped out of a 1920s movie. The whole place screamed expensive in that way that's designed to intimidate anyone who doesn't belong to a country club. You could have fed a small village with what they spent on orchids alone. There were elaborate floral arrangements everywhere you looked. As we pulled up to the valet stand, I spotted my old buddy Ryan outside the main entrance, smoking a cigarette and looking slightly uncomfortable in his formal wear. Ryan and I went to high school together, and now he works at the same investment firm as Tyler. He's one of those rare guys who managed to climb the corporate ladder without losing his working-class attitude or forgetting where he came from. Ryan and I had played basketball together in high school, and he was honestly the only person from our old crew who still kept in touch after he went corporate and started wearing suits to work every day. After catching up with Ryan for a few minutes and letting Lucas burn off some energy running around the hotel's elaborate fountain, we headed inside to the check-in table. There was a young woman working the registration desk, wearing one of those hotel uniforms that tries way too hard to look classy and sophisticated. She typed our names into her tablet and immediately frowned, which I didn't think much of at first. She informed us that we were assigned to table 34, then directed us toward our seating location with a slightly apologetic expression that should have been my first warning sign. Here's where things got interesting. We weren't seated in the main ballroom with everyone else. Instead, we were directed to a small overflow area located directly behind the restrooms, separated from the main reception by what could generously be called a decorative screen. From where we sat, we could only catch glimpses of the actual reception through a narrow gap between the screen and the wall. It was like being given seats to a Broadway show, except your seats are located in the janitor's closet with a periscope. Our table was noticeably smaller than the others we'd seen in the main ballroom, wobbled whenever anyone put their elbows on it, and had no centerpiece or fancy place settings like the other tables. Just our name cards and some basic water glasses that looked like they'd been borrowed from a cafeteria. It was like being seated in the VIP section. If the V stood for virtually a restroom attendant. The main ballroom looked like something straight out of a luxury wedding magazine, with elaborate lighting, beautiful linens, and stunning floral arrangements. Meanwhile, we had a perfect view of the men's room door and could practically count the individual tiles on the bathroom floor from our seats. Every time someone flushed a toilet, our water glasses would vibrate slightly on the unsteady table. Très elegant, as they say. The only other people at our table were Tyler's weird conspiracy theory cousin Derek and his equally strange girlfriend, plus some ancient great-aunt of Victoria's who kept asking if I worked for the hotel and complained loudly that her soup was cold every few minutes. It was like being stuck at the kids' table, except the kids' table was located in a bathroom antechamber. After about 10 minutes of this surreal seating arrangement, I excused myself to check out the bar situation. Really? I just needed a minute to breathe and collect myself before I said something I'd regret in front of my wife and son. That's when Ryan's girlfriend Lisa spotted me near the bar and waved me over with an expression that suggested she had something important to tell me. When I explained our bizarre seating arrangement to her, Lisa hesitated for a moment before looking around to make sure no one was listening. She then informed me that Tyler had specifically instructed Victoria to put us somewhere out of the way because he didn't want us embarrassing him in front of his boss and the other important guests. Lisa worked in event planning and had actually helped Victoria with some of the wedding coordination details. She'd overheard Tyler and Victoria discussing the seating chart in their condo one evening while she was waiting for Ryan to pick her up after a planning session. According to Lisa, Tyler had pointed directly to our names on the seating chart and said, "Just put them somewhere they won't interact with anyone important. Blake will probably wear the wrong kind of suit and talk about truck routes all night." My blood pressure absolutely skyrocketed when I heard this, but I managed to keep my expression neutral and simply nodded while thanking Lisa for the information. Megan, who had come looking for me and unfortunately overheard the last part of our conversation, squeezed my hand hard when I returned to our restroom-adjacent table and whispered urgently for me not to do anything stupid. I assured her that I wouldn't cause a scene, though internally, I was seething at the casual disrespect Tyler had shown to his own family. I needed some fresh air and definitely another drink, so I told Megan I was going to hit the bar for a few minutes. Instead, I found Ryan near the designated smoking area again, where he was working on what appeared to be his fourth cigarette, based on the collection of butts crushed under his dress shoe. When I mentioned our bizarre seating arrangement and what Lisa had told me, Ryan winced visibly and admitted that he'd noticed where we'd been placed. After a moment of what seemed like internal debate, he sighed heavily and told me something that I definitely shouldn't know about. According to Ryan, Tyler was in the final stages of securing a massive distribution deal with a major client, a $3.2 million contract that would basically guarantee him a promotion to senior vice president at his firm. The CEO of this client company was actually at the wedding as a personal guest of Tyler's boss, which explained why Tyler was so concerned about making the right impression tonight. Ryan explained that Tyler had been positioning himself as the key relationship manager for this account for several months now. He'd been taking the CEO out to expensive lunches at places like Ruth's Chris, sending elaborate gift baskets to their corporate office, and basically claiming that he had some kind of special insight into their distribution needs because of his supposed industry connections. "He's been hinting that he's got some family in the shipping business that gives him insider knowledge," Ryan said, taking another drag from his cigarette. "But he never mentions that it's you specifically, just talks vaguely about his distribution sources, like he's some kind of logistics guru who has access to industry secrets." Here's where the story gets really interesting, and where my anger started transforming into something much more dangerous. This client that Tyler was supposedly landing through his amazing business acumen? It was my company's biggest account. I had personally saved them close to $600,000 last year by completely reworking their Cleveland-Cincinnati shipping route. I'd played golf with their operations director David several times over the past few years. We had a solid professional relationship built on mutual respect and results. This wasn't just some random client that Tyler had magically connected with through his networking skills. I had spent 7 months analyzing their shipping patterns in exhaustive detail, identifying inefficiencies in their current system, and designing a completely custom distribution model that cut their transportation costs nearly in half. I'd personally presented this plan to their executive team, implemented the changes with my own hands-on oversight, and still handled their quarterly performance reviews. They weren't just a client to me. They were my client, and the relationship I'd built with them was based on real results and genuine expertise. According to Ryan, Tyler had been telling everyone at his investment firm that he'd secured this lucrative relationship because of his personal connections to their management team. He'd been strongly implying that he was the reason they worked with my shipping company in the first place. He takes these guys to Ruth's Chris once a month and acts like he's giving them some kind of special access to shipping insights, Ryan continued. He's always talking about my logistics team and how he's personally overseeing the distribution strategy for their account. The other day, he told Richard, that's his boss, that he was the one who suggested the route changes that saved them all that money. When I asked Ryan if Tyler actually knew about my direct connection to this account, Ryan shook his head. He probably doesn't have a clue. Tyler just knows you work at the shipping company in some kind of management role. I've heard him tell people that you drive a forklift because apparently in Tyler's mind, anyone who doesn't wear custom-tailored suits to work every day must be operating heavy machinery. Ryan continued his explanation, and what he told me next made my blood run cold. Last week, Tyler was showing off these detailed shipping reports in a meeting. All these charts and data about efficiency metrics and cost analyses. I recognized your company's logo on them, but he'd covered up the author's name with sticky notes. He kept calling it my distribution analysis and presenting it like he'd personally created all this data. Ryan confirmed that the deal was basically a done deal at this point, with the paperwork being drafted that very week and expected to close within days. Once the contract was finalized, Tyler would receive a massive performance bonus and almost certainly get promoted to senior vice president at the incredibly young age of 32. The position would come with stock options, a corner office with windows, and probably another $120,000 added to his annual salary. All of this success and recognition would be built entirely on stolen work and outright lies. Tyler was essentially about to become the golden boy of his investment firm by taking credit for my months of hard work and expertise. As Ryan headed back inside to rejoin the reception, I stood there in the cool evening air, feeling the pieces of a plan starting to form in my mind. I wasn't just angry anymore. That emotion had transformed into something much more calculated and focused. All those years of optimizing shipping routes and solving complex logistical problems had taught me how to identify the most efficient path to any destination. And right now, my destination was exposing Tyler's fraud in the most devastating way possible. I walked back into the reception with a new sense of purpose, trying to enjoy what could generously be called a rubbery chicken dinner while keeping a mental tally of how many times the men's room door creaked open and closed during our meal. 34 times if you're keeping track. Each time someone entered or exited the restroom, a waft of industrial-strength bathroom cleaner would drift over to our table. Nothing enhances a $220 per plate dinner quite like the aromatic bouquet of urinal cakes and disinfectant. While picking at my overpriced meal, I scanned the main ballroom and spotted David from the distribution company sitting at one of the premium tables near the front of the room. He was chatting animatedly with some executives from Tyler's investment firm, including Tyler's boss, a distinguished silver-haired man named Richard, whom I'd met once at a business function years ago. As I watched, Tyler joined their table with his characteristic confidence, all smiles and backslapping camaraderie. It was classic Tyler in action, working the room, playing the part of the successful young executive with perfect connections, completely unaware that his house of cards was about to collapse. I excused myself from our bathroom-adjacent table and made my way to the men's room, figuring I might as well take advantage of our premium restroom access. As luck would have it, David walked in just as I was washing my hands at the sink. "Blake!" he exclaimed, genuinely pleased and surprised to see me. "What the hell are you doing here?" David had always been a friendly, down-to-earth guy despite his executive position. He was the kind of client who remembered your kids' names and asked about your weekend before getting down to business discussions. We weren't close friends exactly, but we had developed a solid professional relationship built on mutual respect and consistently positive results, which was honestly more than I could say for most of my family relationships at this point. He seemed genuinely surprised to learn that I was actually the groom's brother, which told me everything I needed to know about how Tyler had been presenting our family connection. We chatted for a few minutes while David used the facilities, and he brought up the major deal they were finalizing with Tyler's investment firm the following week. "Your brother's been instrumental in putting this whole thing together," David said, while washing his hands at the adjacent sink. "He says he's got special insight into the shipping industry because of family connections, but he never mentioned it was you specifically. Small world, right?" I nodded, feeling that cold anger settling deeper into my stomach like a block of ice. Tyler's always been creative with the truth, I replied, keeping my voice carefully neutral. I led David back to our table and introduced him to Megan and Lucas, thinking it might be interesting to see how this played out. David has kids of his own, so he and Lucas immediately hit it off talking about space shuttles and whether humans would ever make it to Mars. When David asked why we were seated all the way back by the restrooms despite me being the brother of the groom, I just shrugged and let him draw his own conclusions about our family dynamics. Strange choice, David commented, looking around at our isolated location with obvious confusion. Especially since you're the guy who's been saving us over $500,000 a year on shipping costs. You'd think that would earn you a better seat than next to the bathroom. As David headed back to his table in the main ballroom, I caught Tyler watching our interaction from across the room. His face went visibly pale when he recognized who I was talking to. Tyler knew exactly who David was. He was the key decision-maker for the account that was about to make Tyler's career. Tyler also knew that I knew David, which meant he was probably starting to piece together that he might have a serious problem on his hands. Judging by his panicked expression, it was like watching someone realize they'd left their curling iron plugged in while boarding an international flight. His panic was almost comical, but I wasn't nearly done with him yet. Tyler excused himself from his table and made a beeline for the hallway, frantically pulling out his phone. No doubt he was trying to do some kind of damage control, but it was already too little, too late. The wheels were in motion, and there was no stopping what was coming next. I decided to dig a little deeper into this situation, so I texted Lisa and asked her about some files that Tyler had supposedly needed from my office during a family visit last Christmas. She confirmed that Tyler had indeed taken some route efficiency reports, claiming that I had asked him to review them since he was helping with the client relationship. When Lisa forwarded me the related email chain, all the pieces suddenly clicked into place with crystal clarity. Tyler had systematically obtained my confidential route optimization reports, the exact same reports I had created that saved the client over $500,000 in shipping costs. He was using my proprietary work to secure this massive deal with his investment firm, presenting my analysis and recommendations as his own brilliant insights. These weren't just routine business documents that anyone could access. They represented months of intensive work, including proprietary algorithms I'd personally developed for calculating optimal load distribution and custom software tools I'd created to model different routing scenarios. This was the kind of intellectual property that companies guard zealously because it gives them a serious competitive edge in the marketplace. And Tyler had stolen it all to make himself look like some kind of logistics genius to his colleagues and superiors. I forwarded all the evidence to my work email account and also sent a copy to Ryan's personal email address, just to be safe and ensure I had backups of everything. Then, I ordered another drink and settled in to watch Tyler continue working the room, completely unaware of the professional and personal destruction that was about to rain down on him. He looked like a squirrel taking selfies on the highway, blissfully ignorant of the approaching semi-truck that was about to end his fraudulent little game. The reception continued in full swing around us. The first dance had been completed, the cake had been cut with the traditional fake smiles and feeding each other, and the boring speeches from various family members had been mercifully concluded. Tyler hadn't acknowledged our existence even once throughout the entire evening, except for a brief dismissive moment in the receiving line when he introduced me to Victoria's parents as my brother Blake. He works at a shipping company or something. The casual dismissal in his voice was exactly what I'd expected, but it still stung. I was about to make my move and put my plan into action when something completely unexpected happened. My phone buzzed with a text message from Ryan that simply said, "Check your email right now. This is urgent." I stepped outside to a quiet hallway where I could have some privacy and opened my email app. Ryan had forwarded me an email chain that I definitely wasn't supposed to see. A series of messages between Tyler and my father from 4 months ago that made my blood run cold. The subject line alone was enough to make me sick. Blake's shipping reports. Need copies ASAP. The emails were shockingly explicit and detailed, laying out a conspiracy between Tyler and my father that went far deeper than I could have imagined. The first message was from Tyler to my dad. "Dad, I need those shipping reports Blake showed you at Christmas, the ones for National Supply Chain. My boss says if I can land this account, the SVP position is mine. This could change everything for me." My father's response was equally damning. "I'll get them next time we're at his house. He keeps copies in his home office. He'll never know they're missing, and this is too important for your career." Tyler's follow-up message was even more specific. "Perfect. I need the route optimization data and the cost analysis spreadsheets especially. The quarterly projections would be helpful too if you can get them. This deal is worth millions to the firm. The final message in that thread was from my father a week later. Got the reports? Scanned them and attached all the files. Delete this email after you download them. Blake would be furious if he knew what we were doing. Tyler's response was the knife twist. Thanks, Dad. Don't worry, this stays between us. Blake will never know, and honestly, it's not like he'd do anything productive with these reports anyway. They're wasted on him. This is my chance to finally make something of myself. My father's final message in the chain was chilling. Just be careful how you use them. Make sure to change the formatting so they don't look like they came directly from his company. We can't have this traced back to us. But there was more. Ryan had forwarded me another email chain, this one between my father and mother from just last month. The subject line read, "Tyler's money situation. I'm worried." My father wrote, "Patricia, I don't think we should give Tyler any more money. We've already put $130,000 into his various investment opportunities over the past few years, and we haven't seen a single dime back. I'm starting to think we've been played." My mother's response was heartbreaking in its blind devotion. "Robert, he's our son. He says this distribution company deal is absolutely guaranteed. Once it closes, he's promised he'll pay us back everything with substantial interest. He showed me the projections. This is different from all the other times." My father's reply revealed the full scope of their financial devastation. "Those projections are based on reports I stole from Blake's office, Patricia. What if someone finds out? And we're going to have to refinance the house at our age. I'm 69 years old. I should be enjoying retirement, not taking out new mortgages, because our son keeps promising us returns that never materialize." My mother's final message in the chain was the most delusional. "This time it's different, Robert. Tyler showed me all the documentation. This distribution contract will bring in millions for his firm, and his cut will be enough to pay us back and set us up for life. We just have to believe in him one more time." Reading these emails, I realized that my father had systematically stolen my proprietary work from my home office and given it to Tyler, while Tyler had been financially bleeding my parents dry with promises of big returns that never came. My parents were literally remortgaging their house at 69 and 63 years old because Tyler's financial strategy was apparently less Warren Buffett and more Bernie Madoff meets a gambling addict with impulse control issues. I suddenly remembered that weekend in March when my dad had stopped by unexpectedly, claiming he was just in the neighborhood. He'd asked to use my home office to check his email while Mom was out in the garden with Megan, looking at the spring flowers. I'd thought it was strange at the time because my father never just dropped by unannounced, but I'd been distracted helping Lucas with a complicated science project about planetary orbits and didn't think much of it. Now I realized that my own father had been methodically betraying me while pretending to visit his grandson. Another text from Ryan informed me that my father was also the one who had specifically suggested putting us near the restroom, telling Tyler it would be better if his shipping manager's son wasn't visible to the investment firm partners. The rage I felt at this revelation was ice cold and crystal clear. This wasn't just Tyler being his usual selfish self. This was my father actively undermining me to prop up his favorite son, participating in a deliberate plan to humiliate me at a family gathering. I walked back into the reception with a completely new understanding of the situation and a revised plan that was far more comprehensive than my original idea. This wasn't just about embarrassing Tyler anymore. This was about exposing decades of lies, manipulation, and systematic favoritism that had finally crossed into outright theft and fraud. I spotted my father standing with Tyler, David, and some executives from Tyler's investment firm near the bar. They were all laughing together, probably sharing some inside joke about golf memberships or vacation homes. My father was wearing a new suit that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. He was playing the part of the successful businessman's father, basking in his successful son's reflected glory. Both of them were completely unaware that their entire house of cards was built on stolen work and lies, and that I now had documentary evidence of their conspiracy. I approached the group calmly and asked my father if I could borrow him for a second, interrupting their animated conversation about whatever wealthy people discuss at fancy weddings. He looked visibly annoyed at the interruption, clearly not wanting to be pulled away from his moment of basking in Tyler's supposed success. He reluctantly excused himself from the group and followed me to a quieter corner of the reception area. When I confronted him directly about stealing my shipping reports from my home office, the color completely drained from his face in an instant. He tried to deny everything at first, stammering something about not knowing what I was talking about, until I pulled out my phone and showed him the email chain that Ryan had forwarded to me. His expression shifted from confused denial to pure panic faster than I'd ever seen anyone's demeanor change. "Robert, I can explain," he said, using his first name instead of Dad, because this conversation had moved far beyond normal family dynamics. "Explain what exactly?" I replied, keeping my voice low but letting the intensity show through. "Explain how you broke into my desk drawer to steal proprietary company information? How you gave it to Tyler so he could pass off my work as his own brilliant insights? Or maybe you want to explain how you suggested seating your own grandson by the restroom so he wouldn't embarrass your precious golden child in front of his business associates?" I also confronted him about the money situation that the emails had revealed. "Let's talk about how Tyler has been systematically bleeding you and Mom dry for years with his sure thing investments. You're remortgaging your house at 69 years old to fund his fake lifestyle, aren't you? How exactly did you think this was going to end?" My father just stared down at his expensive new shoes, unable to meet my eyes. For the first time in my life, I'd rendered him completely speechless, which was honestly a remarkable achievement. "I don't understand your endgame here," I continued, my voice getting more intense. "What was your plan? Did you actually believe Tyler would pay you back someday? Or were you just so desperate to make him successful that you didn't care about the consequences? You're about to lose your house because of his lies." My father finally looked up, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tyler has potential. He just needs a little help to get established in his career." "A little help?" I shot back. "You're remortgaging your house at 69 years old. You stole confidential documents from your other son's office. That's not a little help. That's pathological favoritism that's crossed into criminal behavior." Tyler noticed our increasingly tense conversation from across the room and headed over with obvious concern written all over his face. When I showed him the emails about both the stolen reports and the money our parents had given him over the years, his expression shifted from confusion to absolute panic in seconds. He immediately started begging me to keep my voice down, glancing nervously toward Victoria across the room who was chatting with her bridesmaids. "Blake, please," he whispered urgently. "We can talk about this tomorrow after the wedding. I'll explain everything then, I promise. Like you explained to Mom and Dad why they needed to give you $130,000 for your sure thing investments that never paid out," I replied. "Or like you explained to your boss how you came up with those amazing shipping insights that were actually stolen from my desk drawer." I ignored his desperate pleas and waved over David and Tyler's boss Richard, who had been watching our heated conversation with growing curiosity. When they approached, I calmly explained that the route optimizations that had saved their company so much money were actually my work. Reports that my father had stolen from my home office so Tyler could use them to secure his big deal with their investment firm. The quarterly projection models, the route efficiency algorithms, the cost-saving strategies, those are all my work, I said, pulling up the incriminating emails on my phone as evidence. Tyler has been presenting them as his own insights to secure your business partnership. The stunned silence that followed was absolutely deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that corner of the reception. Richard looked back and forth between Tyler and my father, his face hardening as he processed what I'd just told him. "Is this true?" he asked Tyler directly. My father tried to claim there had been some kind of misunderstanding, but I handed my phone to Richard and let him scroll through the email chain himself. Richard was a serious man with old-school business ethics, and I could see his expression getting more disgusted with each message he read. I also revealed to Richard that Tyler had been telling our parents that this deal would help him pay back the $130,000 he'd taken from them over the past few years. Money they'd had to remortgage their house to give him. "They're in their late 60s, I explained to Richard, watching his expression grow even more disgusted. "My father worked in banking for 42 years and should be enjoying a comfortable retirement. Instead, they're taking out a new mortgage because their son keeps promising them returns on investments that never materialize." Richard's face hardened even further as he absorbed the full scope of Tyler's deception. He told Tyler in a voice that could freeze water that they would be discussing this situation first thing Monday morning in his office. The tone made it clear that this wasn't going to be a friendly performance review. Victoria, who had noticed the commotion brewing in our corner, started making her way over with a concerned expression, just as David pulled me aside to talk privately. As I prepared to leave and collect Megan and Lucas from our restroom-adjacent table, I couldn't help but point out to my father that this was the exact table he'd specifically suggested Tyler put us at. The look of shame and realization on his face was worth every single second we'd spent sitting next to the men's room all evening. The consequences of my revelations were swift and absolutely merciless. The big distribution deal collapsed overnight like a house of cards in a hurricane. David called me personally the next morning to explain that his company couldn't in good conscience continue working with an investment firm that had obtained their business through fraudulent means and stolen intellectual property. Instead, they wanted to expand their direct relationship with my shipping company, potentially doubling our existing contract and bringing in millions more in revenue. Tyler wasn't just suspended pending investigation, he was fired with cause within 48 hours. The charges against him included corporate espionage, theft of intellectual property, and using confidential information to secure a fraudulent business deal. His boss, Richard, filed a formal complaint with the Investment Industry Regulatory Board, effectively blacklisting Tyler from any similar position in the financial sector for the foreseeable future. Career-wise, Tyler went from rising star to radioactive waste faster than you can say fraud investigation. Richard personally called me to apologize for his firm's unwitting participation in Tyler's scheme. He explained that the company had a strict zero-tolerance policy for ethical violations, especially those involving client relationships and stolen work. If he'd stolen information from a competitor, that would be bad enough, Richard told me during our phone conversation. But stealing from his own brother and presenting it as original work, that crosses every line we have. There's no coming back from something like that. 4 days after what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, Victoria filed for an annulment. It turned out she'd had no idea about Tyler's financial house of cards or the extent of his deception. The family money he'd claimed to have was completely non-existent. The investment portfolio he'd bragged about was actually underwater. The prenuptial agreement she'd signed was completely useless because Tyler literally had nothing to protect. It was all smoke and mirrors. Victoria's father, a successful surgeon with old money connections and a sterling reputation, was absolutely furious when the truth came out. He wasn't just angry about the wedding expenses, which had been considerable and largely paid for by Victoria's family. He was livid about the potential damage to his own reputation in their social and professional circles. He'd personally vouched for Tyler with several business associates, introducing him as his future son-in-law and implying that he was some kind of financial wonderkind. Now those same associates were calling to express their concerns about the doctor's judgment and character assessment. When the full truth about Tyler's finances became public knowledge, his creditors descended on him like vultures on roadkill. The BMW X5 was repossessed from his former firm's parking lot in front of all his ex-colleagues, which had to be particularly humiliating. The fancy condo with the exposed ductwork went into foreclosure proceedings. Tyler went from living like the Wolf of Wall Street to being the guy sleeping on his conspiracy theorist cousin's couch in record time. The final devastating blow came when one of Tyler's shadier investment partners, a questionable character he'd borrowed $60,000 from for some cryptocurrency scheme, showed up at my parents' house looking for his money. This guy was built like a linebacker and had a neck tattoo that said Karma in bold, blocky letters. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. My father actually had to call the police to get rid of him. Nothing says, "I've made excellent financial decisions," quite like having a man literally named Karma threatening your elderly parents on their front porch. It turned out that Tyler had been borrowing money from increasingly questionable sources as legitimate lenders caught onto his deteriorating financial situation. He'd started with traditional bank loans, then moved on to high-interest credit cards when the banks started rejecting his applications. From there, he'd progressed to personal loans from colleagues and acquaintances, and finally graduated to the kind of alternative financing that comes with implied physical threats rather than written contracts and legal protections. 3 weeks after the wedding that was supposed to launch him into financial success, Tyler filed for bankruptcy. The court documents revealed that he had accumulated over $320,000 in total debt while having exactly zero assets to his name. His credit score was now lower than the average temperature in Antarctica during winter. The bankruptcy filing exposed the full extent of Tyler's financial deception to anyone who cared to look up the public records. According to the documents, Tyler had been living on approximately $270,000 per year, despite his actual salary of $130,000. The difference had been funded through a complex web of loans, cash advances, credit card debt, and money systematically extracted from our parents over several years. The filing revealed that he'd spent $47,000 in the previous year alone on clothing and accessories, nearly half of his legitimate income, just on looking successful. My mother called me daily for weeks after the wedding, alternating between begging me to help Tyler get back on his feet and blaming me for completely ruining his life. I let most of her calls go to voicemail because I'd heard the same pattern of excuses and blame shifting my entire life, and I was finally done listening to it. "How could you embarrass him at his own wedding?" she demanded in one particularly shrill voicemail message. "He was about to turn everything around with this business deal. Now he's lost everything because you couldn't let him have his moment of success. This could have changed his whole life." There was no acknowledgement that the moment was built entirely on stolen work. No recognition that Tyler had been systematically defrauding them for years with promises that never materialized. Just the same old refrain that had dominated my childhood. Protect Tyler at all costs, regardless of the truth or the consequences for anyone else. A week after the bankruptcy filing, I agreed to meet my father at a small diner near my house. He looked noticeably older and more tired than I'd ever seen him, with the arrogant confidence completely gone from his posture and demeanor. Without any preamble or small talk, he told me that I'd made my point, and now needed to help them fix the disaster I'd created. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what he'd done, no recognition of his role in the situation. When I asked him which specific part of this disaster he expected me to magically repair, he finally admitted what I'd suspected. They were going to lose the house. The bank had called the day before, and they simply couldn't make the payments on their new mortgage with their fixed retirement income. The house they'd lived in for over 30 years, the one I'd grown up in, was going to be foreclosed on because they'd mortgaged it to fund Tyler's fraudulent lifestyle. I pointed out that this was the direct and predictable result of them continuously giving money to Tyler for his sure things and stealing confidential information from their other son to help their golden child succeed. My father just stared into his untouched cup of coffee and mumbled that Tyler had promised to pay everything back once his career took off. "Tyler has potential," he said, using almost the exact same words he'd used to justify the favoritism throughout our childhood. "He just needs a little help to get established." "A little help?" I repeated incredulously. "You're about to lose your house at 69 years old. You committed theft to help him steal from your other son. That's not a little help. That's pathological favoritism that's destroyed your financial security." Tyler arrived at the diner about 20 minutes later, looking like he hadn't slept properly in days. His usual polished appearance was completely gone. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was unkempt, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone whose entire world had collapsed. He explained that he desperately needed any kind of job because his credit was so damaged he couldn't even rent a basic apartment. Victoria's lawyer was coming after him for fraud related to their short-lived marriage, and his conspiracy theorist cousin Derek wanted him off the couch by the end of the month because even Derek had standards. It was like watching a peacock transform into a plucked chicken right before my eyes. The transformation was almost too dramatic to believe, but the evidence was sitting right in front of me. I pointed out to Tyler that he could have come to me at any time over the years for legitimate help with his career or finances. Instead, he'd chosen to steal my work and systematically drain our parents' retirement savings while lying to everyone about his situation. He didn't try to deny any of it. The evidence was too overwhelming, and the consequences too immediate for him to maintain his usual delusional confidence. After some serious consideration and discussion with Megan that night, I agreed to talk to David about finding Tyler an entry-level position at my shipping company. I made it clear that this would be something in the mailroom or warehouse at minimum wage, with absolutely no special treatment because of our family relationship. If he wanted to work his way up like I had, he'd have to prove himself through actual effort and results, not lies and stolen work. I also told them I'd look into my parents' refinancing situation to see if there were any options to restructure their debt, or if they'd need to seriously consider downsizing to something they could actually afford. My father seemed genuinely shocked at the suggestion that they might need to sell the house and move somewhere smaller. It was as if the idea that actions might have long-term financial consequences had never occurred to him before. I reminded both of them that actions have consequences, even theirs, and that the situation they were in was entirely of their own making. My father looked at me like I'd suggested they should start living in a cardboard box under a bridge and surviving on cat food and rainwater. The reality that they might have to significantly downsize their lifestyle after 30-plus years in the same house was apparently too much for him to process. A month later, Tyler started working in our company warehouse, loading trucks on the overnight shift. It was exactly the same job I'd had when I was 20 years old, starting at the very bottom of the industry ladder. His beloved BMW X5 was long gone, replaced by a 16-year-old Honda Civic that was held together by duct tape, prayer, and sheer determination. The contrast between his former lifestyle and his current reality was stark and somewhat satisfying to witness. My parents did indeed have to sell the house, the same house I'd grown up in, where all my childhood memories were made. They moved into a small 2-bedroom condominium in a 55-plus community that was a significant step down from their previous living situation. However, selling the house did pay off their new mortgage completely and left them with enough money to rebuild at least some of their depleted retirement savings. It wasn't the comfortable retirement they'd planned, but it was better than losing everything to foreclosure. As for Victoria, she sent me a long, thoughtful email several weeks after the annulment was finalized. She apologized profusely for the wedding seating arrangement and explained that she'd had absolutely no idea about any of Tyler's financial deceptions or the extent of his lies about his background and connections. Reading between the lines of her message, it was clear that she was a decent person who'd gotten caught up in Tyler's elaborate web of deception through no fault of her own. I wrote back wishing her well in whatever came next, and suggesting that she might want to get a complete credit report and financial background check, just in case Tyler had opened any accounts or taken out loans in her name during their brief marriage. I'd learned enough about his methods to know that identity theft wasn't beyond his capabilities. Trust but verify, especially when you've been married to someone who turned out to be a financial con artist. 4 months after the wedding disaster, I received a promotion to Regional Operations Director. David had personally recommended me to our company's CEO after our contract with his distribution company doubled our business throughout the Midwest region. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase, better benefits, and recognition for the work I'd been doing for years. It felt good to be acknowledged for actual accomplishments rather than stolen credit. The same week I got my promotion, I received a text message from Tyler that simply said, "Got my first paycheck today. Not much, but it's honest money. Thanks for giving me the chance." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't forgiveness, and it certainly wasn't a happy ending to our family drama. But it was something real and genuine. Perhaps the first truly authentic communication in our relationship in decades. So here I am, several months later, still processing everything that happened and trying to figure out if I handled the situation correctly. I keep asking myself the same question that's been eating at me since that night. Am I the asshole for exposing my brother and father at the wedding and causing their complete financial ruin? Or did they have it coming? On one hand, I can see how some people might think I went too far. It was Tyler's wedding day, supposedly the happiest day of his life, and I chose that moment to detonate a bomb that destroyed not just his career, but his marriage, his financial future, and his relationship with his new wife's family. I could have confronted him privately, given him a chance to come clean, or handled the situation in a way that didn't involve public humiliation at what was supposed to be a celebration. But on the other hand, they seated me next to the fucking restroom because they were ashamed of me. They literally put me and my family in the equivalent of social exile because Tyler was worried I might embarrass him in front of his boss, the same boss he was planning to defraud using my stolen work. The irony is almost too perfect to be real. Tyler had been systematically stealing my intellectual property for months, using my hard work to build his reputation and secure a promotion that would have set him up for life. My father had actively participated in this theft, breaking into my desk and stealing confidential documents from my home office while pretending to visit his grandson. They'd been bleeding my parents dry financially for years, forcing them to remortgage their house in their late 60s to fund Tyler's fake lifestyle of expensive cars, fancy apartments, and designer clothes. The more I think about it, the more I realize that what I exposed at the wedding wasn't just a single instance of fraud. It was the culmination of decades of lies, manipulation, and systematic favoritism that had finally crossed the line into actual criminal behavior. Tyler wasn't just living beyond his means. He was actively stealing from his own family and defrauding his employer. My father wasn't just showing favoritism. He was committing theft to help his golden child succeed at the expense of his other son. They made their choices, and I simply revealed the truth about what they'd been doing. The consequences they faced were the natural result of their own actions, not some vindictive punishment I imposed on them. If Tyler hadn't stolen my work, there would have been nothing to expose. If my father hadn't participated in the theft, he wouldn't have been implicated. If they hadn't spent years treating me like a second-class family member, maybe I would have been more inclined to handle things quietly. The wedding seating arrangement was just the final insult that pushed me over the edge. After a lifetime of being treated as less important than Tyler, after watching my parents sacrifice their financial security to enable his lies, after discovering that my own father had stolen from me to help Tyler succeed. Being relegated to the restroom table was the moment I decided I was done protecting them from the consequences of their choices. Some people might say I should have been the bigger person, that family loyalty should have trumped everything else. But loyalty has to go both ways, and my family had made it clear through their actions that I was expendable. They were willing to steal from me, lie to me, and humiliate me, all to protect Tyler's fraudulent success. At what point do you stop enabling that kind of behavior? I've lost sleep over this decision, wondering if there was a better way to handle everything. But every time I think about Lucas sitting at that table next to the bathroom, watching other families celebrate together while his own grandparents couldn't be bothered to acknowledge him properly, I remember why I did what I did. My son deserved better than being treated as an embarrassment. My wife deserved better than being hidden away like some shameful secret. And honestly, I deserved better than being robbed by my own family. So Reddit, what do you think? Was I justified in exposing everything at the wedding, or should I have handled this differently? Am I the asshole for choosing that moment to reveal the truth? Or did my brother and father create this situation through their own choices and actions? TLDR. My family seated me by the restrooms at my brother's wedding because they thought I'd embarrass them. Turns out my brother was using stolen reports from my job to secure a huge business deal, and my father helped him steal them from my home office. I exposed everything at the reception, which led to my brother getting fired, his marriage being annulled, and my parents losing their house. Did they deserve it, or did I go too far?